Hi, I'm Clever Ghoul, but you can call me Nikki. Welcome back to the channel. Recently, I was on a road trip up north visiting one of my dear friends who happens to be growing a ton of pumpkins right now. And I don't know if you've ever grown pumpkins, I certainly haven't, but they tend to overtake the yard. And so she was giving us a bunch of them to take home. And as I was thinking about it on the drive back, I realized I don't really like carving pumpkins because it's a little bit overwhelming. I don't really like the slime or the guts or cleaning it all out. It takes forever. And here in Southern California, I feel like you carve a jack-o'-lantern and the very next day it's rotted and you have to toss it. Maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it does feel like the truth. Anyway, one of the pumpkins I cut had a long, twisty sort of stem to it, and it looked like a crooked nose. The more I looked at it, I realized I could paint this pumpkin to look like a witch. It is the perfect pumpkin for this. I think you can paint your pumpkins however you want to. If you want to carve, there's no shame here. I just don't feel up to it this year. I think painting's a better route for me. With all that being said, let's get into it. For materials, you'll need the following: a real or a fake pumpkin, acrylic paint. I have a lot of paint on hand, but my favorite is this set from Craftsmart: brushes, Posca markers, and any additional items that you may want to add, like gems, beads, feathers, lashes, whatever you can think of. And of course, to attach them, you'll need some hot glue. Everything is linked in the description box below, and I do earn a small commission, so thank you. First, if you're using a real pumpkin, just wipe it off to get any dirt or dust off of it before we begin painting. Next, I wanted to add in the base layer of the skin first. I'm going for a bright green here, so I use the citron green paint. I put in one thin layer with a flat paintbrush, and I only went around about halfway because when my pumpkin sits, you're not really gonna see the back of it. I knew that the paint might take a little longer to dry, and I wanted to speed up the process, so I pulled out a hairdryer and on the warm setting, just went around until it was completely dry. I repeated this same process 3 more times, doing a layer of paint, blow drying, layer of paint, blow drying, until I was fully satisfied with the base layer. From there, I pulled out a green Sharpie and began to map out the facial features, making little dots instead of solid lines, both so that this was easier to cover up and because I noticed that if you drag a Sharpie, it might peel off the acrylic paint. So going with little dots here is the best way to go. Then it was time to paint on the facial features. I started with the mouth and I used a black Posca marker to make the outline of the little smile line and then make the lines of the mouth, outlining where the teeth were so that I had a clear area of where I was going in with the black paint. Then I went in with black acrylic paint, making sure to go in the same direction with all my brush strokes so that it looked even and wasn't streaky, while making sure to fill in any of the deep ridges that the pumpkin had so that there's no spots peeking through. Then I moved on to the eyes, specifically the iris. I knew I wanted a pale yellow base, so I started with that by painting on a thin layer. While I was doing this, I realized that this yellow is the perfect shade for the base of the teeth as well. So once those eyes were done, I decided to add in that yellow onto the teeth. Again, I hit everything with a hairdryer before adding 2 additional coats of this pale yellow onto the iris. Next, I wanted to add in the whites of the eyes. Now, when you're painting or coloring in eyes, you don't want them to be bright white because eyes aren't true white like that. So instead, I took white and mixed in some of that base green paint that we had used to give an off whitish green color to use for the whites of the eyes. And while doing this, again, I realized this might be a good color to put on top of that yellow base of the teeth I had just done, so I added it there as well. Once everything was dry, I pulled out some pale yellow and a coral color and mixed them together to get a nice peachy shade. And then I use that to outline the irises and add almost like a little sunburst going from the center out so that you have a little bit of depth in the iris. From there, I wanted to add a little bit of shadow. So I pulled out a deeper green called Apple Tart and began to apply it, making some lips, adding in the shadow under the eyebrow ridges, adding the bags under the eyes, and outlining the eyes. I then took that same green and took it down the stem of the pumpkin, adding in lines but not covering it fully, just to get a little bit of cohesion in with the coloring, but to not completely let you forget that this is a pumpkin. Once everything was dry, I pulled out a black and green Posca marker to add in some more detail. First, I added in the pupils, adjusting them to be more even in size as needed. Then I roughly added in some very thin eyebrows. We're thinking 90s brows here. And lastly, I outlined the eyes, giving a little bit more of a thicker line to the top of the eye where the lashes would naturally be. Then with the green Posca marker, I added in a little more shading, defining the eye bags, brow lines, and lastly, stippling in some shading around the mouth. Now for the final details. I wanted her to have warts, but I didn't want to just draw or paint them on. I wanted them to be a little bit more 3D and interesting. So I pulled out some flat back gems and some flat back pearls and started playing with color, positioning, size, placement. Ultimately, I decided on these round, dark green gems for the face and 1 green pearl for the nose. Then I just took some hot glue and attached them. As I was gluing these down, I realized something was missing. This witch needs some lashes badly. Now, I could paint them on and that would be totally acceptable, but I knew that I had some old lashes was on hand in a costume box, so I pulled those out and hot glued them onto the eyes. And with that, well, she just needs to borrow a hat from me and she's good to go, which means it's time for the reveal. Here she is. I am so excited about how she turned out. I think she's perfect. Her eyes are a little wonky, sure, but who doesn't love an asymmetrical queen? This hat is a little big for her, but that's okay. I'm really just loving this overall look, and I'm really, really pleased with how it turned out. Like I said, it's so easy. I think in total it took me maybe an hour and a half at most. I will say that I think the hairdryer is a necessary item here because otherwise it just kind of wants to sit on top of the layer of the pumpkin and just it dries a bit slower than it normally would. Now my witch is gonna stay inside, but if you're gonna put these outside, I would also recommend getting spray sealant and just spraying it down. That way it'll be a little bit safer in the elements. Anyway, like I said, you could do anything with this project. You could paint flowers all over it, you could make flames, you could draw a spooky scene. I could go on for days telling you all the different ways that you could make this pumpkin unique with paint. So if you're gonna make this at home, tell me what you're gonna do. Are you gonna do a character or a monster or a witch like I did? Or are you gonna do something a little different like polka dots? I just would love to hear, so please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.